안녕하세요. 유튜브 에듀팟을 진행하고 있는 장연화입니다. 지난달 유씨가 SAT 대입시험 점수를 필수에서 선택 항목으로 바꿨는데요. 그때 우리 아이보리우드 에듀케이션 마리김 원장님을 초청해서 저희가 설명을 듣는 시간을 가졌습니다. 에세이는 어떻게 써야 되는 게 좋을지, 정말 SAT를 택해야 되는 게 좋을지 이런 얘기 등을 설명을 들었는데요. 그때 저희가 맨 끝에 다음번에는 우리가 사립대 대입 지원에 대해서 얘기를 나눠보겠다고 말씀을 드렸었어요. 그때 약속대로 이번에 마리김 원장님을 다시 초대해서 이야기 듣는 시간을 마련했습니다. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요. 다시 와서 반갑습니다.
우리 많은 학생들이 유씨뿐만 아니라 사립대 지원하는 경우가 굉장히 많거든요. 근데 이런 유씨 등 이런 유씨 같은 주립대 또는 공립대 대학교와 또 우리 사립대 우리 지원서하고 좀 다를 것 같아요. 어떤 게 제일 다른지 좀 설명해 주세요. So what's the major difference between public university and private university in admission process?
Yeah. So I'm going to say it comes down to this, and this is from my observations advising lots of seniors through the application process and also doing my research. The public schools and the universities like UC, as well as Virginia Tech or Purdue, these out-of-state public schools, they get a lot of applications, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands. Whereas the private schools, they get maybe 20 to 30 to 40,000 applications. So they get fewer applications, and they're accepting maybe like a tenth or so. Both public and private, they might be acceptance rates might be in that range. So what does that say? That means there's so many more applicants and applications in the public schools, in the UCs, that they have to do the process more efficiently and just be more straightforward. Like who makes the cut, who has the credentials, academically, test scores, activities, who's done that. And of course, they're still looking at the whole application, right? Because one thing that is similar, whether it's the UCs or these private schools, is it's holistic. Even the UCs are definitely thinking about a student's background, their socioeconomic status, right? The opportunities they had in their neighborhood at their school. And so that's a holistic, it's not just their GPA test scores and it's like some sort of cutoff. So they do think about the whole student as well as the private schools. But I think what it comes down to is when there is so many more applications and just the same amount of time, it's more straightforward. It's like out of these students in this pool, who really stands apart competitively and who has earned a spot. And they get kind of at the top of the list, their short list. The private schools are a little more kind of, so it's like if the public school is more, what does a student bring? What's your contribution? Do you become a competitive applicant? And then the acceptance chances are kind of determined that way. Now, in the private schools, they've got these things called their institutional needs, right? Or their institutional interests. So like the private schools, they have to think about donations. They have to think about, relationships with ongoing families. They have to think about, right, things like legacy, filling up their varsity teams, right? The school athletics and the different programs. And those things really matter at the private schools because it's all about the whole, college and life and campus experience. So when they do that, then it's like, it becomes more about, not just what does a student bring, but there's like this added layer of what does a student bring and does that student fit what we need at our school? So like if they need some type of instrumentalists, like an oboist or something in their orchestra, well, right, that's going to be the priority then. That's going to be an important factor in their decision. And it's not like it comes down to just like a high GPA or like high test scores, right? And so I think what you want to think about when you apply to private schools is they are going to take a little more time because they have the time, where they're going to really think about, will this student be able to fulfill what our college really needs in this cycle? And that changes every year, right? So it's like whether it's a sports team or whether it's musical or whether it's like a particular department like East Asian Studies or linguistics or like Germanic languages, and they need those students, then that will become more of a priority in their admissions decisions and figure out, okay, well maybe, and so I think there's more like these like exceptions or special cases or maybe extenuating circumstances, and maybe even like, you know, a little bit of favoritism that goes on at the private schools, again, because they've got to think about other interests. And so the students have to be highly competitive. At the same time, they're willing to understand that they could make some kind of exceptions if they need that role filled at their school. But on the application end, what is different is usually you may not see things like interviews and letters of recommendations in the public school applications. You will sometimes see like the letter of recommendations if like you're applying to an honors program in the public university, or if you're applying for a special department, they may ask for those. Actually, like UC Berkeley, a lot of people don't know this, they will request letters of recommendations from students, only some students. So most people think, oh, UCs don't need recommendations. And you don't for the most part, but like there's this extra piece that UC Berkeley is doing now. They instituted it a couple of years ago where, see, they're trying to understand the student's context more. And so they're willing to accept those letters of recommendations. But by and large, again, I think they're under time constraints and manpower limits that they don't have time to do like these extra interviews or these recommendations. Whereas the private schools have always made that a part of their admissions review. And it's because they are trying to, you know, understand, again, what the student's ultimate contribution is, and if that student is a great fit for their college. And I think the final thing I want to say is, right, there's something called a yield. And when a college is thinking about whether or not they're going to accept a student, they want to really try to gauge, is this student, if we accept them, are they going to come to our school, right? Because they don't have like unlimited acceptances to send out. They've got to be wise about who they're sending acceptance letters to, again, because the pool is smaller. So when they're doing that, they want to see the student showing some sort of evidence that like, if we accepted them, they will probably come to our school. And that's not really the case with the public schools. They're not, again, they don't have a shortage of students. They've got so many students and applicants, and then they're accepting like almost 10 times or more in the student pool. So like, again, that's one more thing to think of in terms of private. So to summarize, right, I think the public schools you want to think about is what's the student's contribution, and that holistic review. The private school is, yeah, what is their contribution? It's also a holistic review, but then you got to think about all the other things that the college really needs to do to advance their needs and interests.
알겠습니다. 그렇다면 우리 지원서가 굉장히 중요한데요. 도대체 어떤 항목이 우리 사립대 지원서에 가장 중요할까요? 아니면 어떤 부분이 가장 중요한지 좀 설명해 주시겠어요? So what is the key elements in the college application? Or we can say what is the most important part of the application?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and parents will say a lot of different things too from what they hear. You tend to hear something like GPA and transcripts. Okay, is that true? To an extent, yes, it is. right? Because it's like 4 years of a student's day-to-day effort, right? Because at the end, you're going to go to college to be a student. You're not going to go to college to be like a businessman. You're going there to be another student in classes, and you want to show that you have that kind of like academic skills, right, and readiness. So if you go to a more competitive college, you want to show that ability to compete at a more rigorous level. Okay, but I'm going to say something that you may be hearing for the first time. And from, again, this is my observations, right? A part of me sees that sometimes it really isn't even your GPA or grades, right? So what is it, right? I think it comes down to your application strategy. And in some ways, this is an unfair process then, because it's almost like, well, most kids don't know how to, most families, especially if it's their first time applying, or most kids, they don't know how to make their application in a strategic way. They don't know. So it's people like me who are like independent advisors and counselors, and people who have access to like private admissions counselors or college counselors who can then strategize their application. Why? Let me give you an example, right? You hear this all the time. You hear the kid with straight A's, the kid with great SAT scores, they don't get in.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay?
Yes.
You hear, okay, so if the most important thing was GPA, then, and that was really the case, then you would see these kids who get the straight A's and who get the, take all the rigorous AP classes getting in. But then you hear they don't get in. So then that must not be the most important. So what is? So when I've really thought about this and I've looked at who's gotten in and who hasn't, you could have a slightly lower GPA. You might not have the best grades. You might have lower ACT, SAT scores, but somehow you get in,
Yes.
right? What happened there? Okay, so it's what you put on your application. It's what you put on paper. Why? Because basically you are what you put on this and on lots of paper, right? It's writing. It's a lot of stories. It's a lot of packaging. It's a lot of marketing. And most kids and parents have never done that in their life. And so they've done everything they think they're supposed to do. Oh, get the straight A's, go to SAT prep and get high scores. And then they don't think about the application strategy. They just naively, they just say, okay, fill it out. Put the grades, put the GPA, put the SAT, put my activities, and submit. No, it's a strategy. So what is that strategy composed of, right? It's things like, well, what is your application theme, right? What is kind of the student's standout quality? What are you trying to distinguish them as, okay? It's things like, what major did you select? So again, you could see kids who have, they could be valedictorian, get all the perfect scores, and then they put a major that is probably super hard, but they don't think about the strategy because they're just, again, checking off boxes, thinking, oh, I'm just going to put what I need to, what I believe in or what is me. But that's not a strategy. That's just naively filling out an application. And then when you get your results, you don't get in. And then you see some kid, like, how did they get in? Well, maybe they didn't pick the hardest major.
지금 얘기하는 거를 들으니까 그러니까 마케팅이 굉장히 중요한 애플리케이션에서
Yes.
네, 어떻게 이거를 준비하느냐에 따라서 이 성적이 조금 떨어지더라도 대학에 합격할 수 있는 가능성이 더 클 수 있다는 걸 얘기하는 것 같습니다.
That is, I think, and I think that's why, again, I know it's not a fair or equal process, but I think that's why you see these private independent counselors becoming very important and a lot of families seeking out their help and their advice because they're probably hearing, oh, somebody got in, but they're, you know, like, I don't think they had the highest GPA or the highest SAT score. How did they get in? It's what they put on paper. It was their strategy. So that is, because ultimately, unless you get an interview, basically 100% of what the college sees is what you've written on the application.
그렇지만 요즘 사립대학교에서는 인터뷰를 굉장히 많이 하지 않나요? 대부분?
Yes, they do. And they even are doing things like video interviews where if they're not going to send an alumni, they're going to have the student, like Brown and University of Chicago and like even MIT, they'll ask the student, send us a video, record it yourself, like your best self for like 2 minutes or something. That's kind of the interview substitute. Okay, so like, yes, that interview component is if you are great first here. Again,
Yes.
if you don't look good here first, then you may not even get the interview.
That's true.
Okay, so again, once they've seen that, because they don't have everybody who's available to go out and set up an interview, they're going to prioritize who gets an interview. So they do that after they see what you submit on paper.
I see. 너무 감사합니다. 설명을 잘 들었는데요. 학부모님들이 생각하기에는 성적이 좋으면 된다. 아니면 뭐 SAT 점수가 뭐 만점이면은 합격할 수 있겠다라고 생각할 수 있겠지만 지금 들어보니까 이게 골고루 정말 지원서를 잘 작성해야 된다고 설명을 하시네요. 그렇다면 우리 이제 조기 지원서 마감일이 또 얼마 남지 않았습니다. 근데 지금 코로나 바이러스 사태로 또 학생들이 많이 또 걱정하고 있어요. 아, 이번에 진짜 조기 해야 되나 말아야 되나 이런 게 있는데요. 한번 여쭤보겠습니다. So is it really early decision helpful this year?
I will say yes with a caveat. Okay, so you have to first be a student who is already competitive and you have to be ready. So you cannot just think, oh, if it's early, it's going to benefit me and then just submit early. No, that can actually hurt you, right? Because you could mess up a very good chance with your top choice college if you just try to rush an application in, just to think you can benefit from a little early decision boost. So yes, if you are ready. No, if you're not ready. So for instance, if you do not have your SAT scores and you got your March and your June SATs canceled and now like you're going to maybe take it in August or September, but you still don't know if that's your best score, even though a lot of schools are going test optional, that doesn't mean that you don't have to, you can still submit your scores, which could help your case if you get a good score. So in those instances, no, you probably want to wait. But also, like, let's say, you know, last semester you didn't get to finish the semester with a grade. It was maybe pass-fail because of coronavirus, or your grade was like kind of cut short in March, and then you didn't even have an opportunity to improve your grade. So maybe in the middle of the semester you ended up with a C, but you didn't have the time to redeem that grade, and so now you have a C on your record. Then no, you're not ready to do it early. You probably want to wait until first semester senior year is through, and then you can get better grades to then apply for the regular round. So things like that. But who is ready to do it early, and why should you? So yes, I do encourage like our students to definitely apply early if they're ready. Why? Because a couple of things. Early decision means that if you get accepted, you're basically going to attend the college. And that means that you are, as a family, committing to that decision. So there's a couple of things that are at play here. So the first thing is if you're going to do early, then you know without a doubt that, that's the school that you're going to go to. Well, so then you're maybe not even concerned about financial aid. Right? So if you're a family who has resources and doesn't have to worry about comparing financial aid packages, then it's a good opportunity to do it. Why? Because I believe that the applicant pool for the early may be smaller this semester, this fall semester. Why? Because there's a lot of kids who probably are not ready to apply early because of the testing disasters, right? So then there will be fewer applications for the early, but the colleges still want to fill up their class. So that won't, their acceptance rate may not change as much, but then the pool of applicants was smaller.
I see.
So I think that's where the boost would be for the early applicants. But I mean, it's the thing, like most students maybe did not have time over the spring break or during the summer to visit the colleges. So it's hard for them to make a decision about a college maybe they've never seen. So that's also a number of students who are not going to do early decision because they haven't even seen the school yet. So again, that knocks out a bunch of students. So like from the SAT to lack of college visits and tours, there's like these students who are not going to be applying early. But if you're ready, do it. Do it and jump on it because I think that it will benefit you in terms of, getting a slot. One more thing to consider is like, so the students at the colleges, but the students who just got accepted, they may do something like a deferral for a year. So like this class of students from this year, class of 2024, they might not even go to school this fall. They might say, oh, I want to defer. And then there might be like juniors and sophomores from the college who tell the college, I want to take a gap year because they don't want to go to school this year. So then that what happens? That really affects the campus kind of enrollment. So when that happens is there's kind of this like uncertainty in their numbers. So I think there's more of a motivation from the college end to lock in incoming students. And guess what? If they lock in those incoming students and like next year, they get all the gap year students coming back, all the deferrals coming back, and the early decision coming, well, guess what? The regular applicants, there might be just a smaller percentage of students who can be accepted.
Yeah.
Right? So I think going early, if you're ready, might be wise. Absolutely.
너무 좋은 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 조기 지원 준비하고 있는 학생들에게는 이번에 얘기를 들어보니까 좋은 기회가 될 것 같습니다. 준비 잘 하시고요. 도전해 보시기 바랍니다. 조기뿐만이 아니고 정기 전형을 준비하고 있는 사립대 지원자들에게도 마찬가지입니다. 우리 어떤 조언이 있는지 들어볼까요? So what is your advice for whoever preparing application for college, private college?
Yeah, and again, this goes back to my first point earlier about what's different with the private schools, right? And I talked about they make more exceptions, more extenuating circumstances. So what a lot of people don't know is you can explain things on your application. You can send in extra stuff in your application. A lot of people don't know to do that. And so I think going into the private school application, you need to do your job to explain. Why? Because probably your counselors may not do that for you at school. Your counselors, they're already busy just sending your transcripts and then all their recommendations. I don't think they're going to have the time or really they're going to have the ability to sit down with all of their students' applications and explain, oh, like this is what happened with my particular student, Jane, during coronavirus. And so she had no limited access to internet, or she didn't have her maybe she was in Science Olympiad, or maybe she was in like DECA and like she was going to go to nationals. Like nobody's going to explain that. You have to do that. That's the initiative you have to take to explain it. There's sections in the common application and the coalition application and even the institution-specific applications where you can explain those kind of those factors. So you want to take the initiative to do that. I think the one other thing that I might really recommend is think about your college list more in terms of maybe having more options, right? So like before, you might have just been thinking about certain name brand schools, and that you can still do that. But now that the situation with your family could be different, and because there might be less money from colleges to go around, I mean, you might not even be able to go to a certain school because of the financial circumstances. You want to make sure you apply to more schools that are possible to attend. And it could be closer to home. It could be, you know, maybe a lower tier school that you usually would not have thought of, but may give you maybe more scholarships or something like that. So again, it depends on what your family is going through. But I would say look closely at creating a, you know, really solid college list of options.
너무 좋은 말씀 감사합니다. 올해는 진짜 대입 지원자들이 굉장히 힘든 시기가 될 것 같습니다. 진짜 전혀 경험해보지도 못했던 그런 일들을 맞아서 우리 대학교 지원서 작성에도 정말 고민이 많을 텐데요. 우리 옆에 우리 학부모님들이 격려 많이 해주시고 또 많이 도와주시고요. 또 저희 교육 섹션을 통해서 또 이런 유튜브 에듀팟을 통해서 좀 도움을 많이 받기를 원합니다. 오늘 우리 마리기 원장님 나오셔서 감사합니다.
네, 반갑습니다. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 저희는 다음 이 시간에 또 좋은 주제로 찾아오겠습니다. 감사합니다.